Who was the prophet Jeremiah according to the Bible? Have you ever heard of Jeremiah? He was a very special man who lived many years ago, and his story is told in the Bible, a holy book for many people. Jeremiah was not just an ordinary man. He was chosen by God to be a prophet. But what does that mean? Did he predict the future? Let's find out together who Jeremiah was and why his life was so important to people back then and still is today. Jeremiah, the young man chosen by God. Let's imagine a young man named Jeremiah, who lived a long time ago in the city of Jerusalem. He was like any other young person, with his dreams and fears. But Jeremiah's life was about to change in an incredible way. One day, while Jeremiah was tending to his family's animals, something very special happened. The sky seemed bluer, and a sense of peace filled the place. Suddenly, he heard a powerful yet gentle voice speaking directly to him. It was God. God said to Jeremiah, "Before you were even born, I knew you. I chose you to be my prophet and to bring my message to the nations." Jeremiah was scared and confused. He looked around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. Trembling, he replied, "Lord, I don't know how to speak well. I am just a young man." God's voice, full of love and authority, responded, "Do not say you are just a young man. You will go wherever I send you and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid, for I will be with you to protect you." Then, something even more incredible happened. Jeremiah felt an invisible hand touch his lips, and God said, "See, I have put my words in your mouth. Today, I give you authority over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant." Jeremiah felt a mixture of fear and courage. He knew that from that moment on, his life would be dedicated to delivering God's messages to the people, no matter the challenges he would face. As time passed, Jeremiah became a brave prophet. He had to face many difficulties. People often did not want to hear what he had to say. They laughed at him, imprisoned him, and even tried to kill him. But Jeremiah never gave up. He always remembered that special day when God spoke to him and placed his words in his mouth. Jeremiah teaches us an important lesson. No matter how young or inexperienced we may be, God can have great plans for us. He calls us to trust and follow the path He has prepared, with courage and faith. The rejection and persecution of Jeremiah. Imagine being in Jeremiah's place, a young man who had received a divine mission. He had the responsibility of delivering messages of repentance and obedience to God to the people of Judah. But instead of being received with gratitude and reverence, his words were met with disdain, anger, and violence. Every time Jeremiah stood up to speak, he knew he was putting himself in danger. He approached the bustling squares, the noisy markets, and the city gates with a heavy but determined heart. With a firm voice, he cried out for the people to turn back to God, to abandon their corrupt ways, and to return to obeying the divine commandments. But the reactions were brutal. Instead of repentance, Jeremiah encountered mockery. Instead of listening to his words, they rejected him. Religious authorities and political leaders united against him, enraged by his warnings and prophecies of doom. They called him a traitor, a troublemaker, and a madman. Rejection turned into persecution. Jeremiah was imprisoned multiple times. Imagine the cold darkness of the cells where he was thrown, alone and hungry, hearing the echoes of his own breathing and the distant murmurs of his captors. In one of his darkest moments, he was thrown into a muddy cistern, sinking knee-deep in the mire, without water, without food, left to die slowly. His body trembled with cold and fear, but his faith remained unshaken. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. He knew he could have chosen an easier path, could have remained silent. But the voice of God in his heart was stronger than the fear. He remembered that divine touch on his lips, the promise that God would be with him, no matter how dark the night. Even in the moments of greatest despair, God sent help in unexpected ways. Like when Ebed-Melech, an Ethiopian foreigner, interceded for him, risking his own life to rescue Jeremiah from that pit of despair. This was a sign for Jeremiah, and for all of us, that justice and compassion can arise from the most unlikely places. Despite the imprisonments, the mistreatment, and the constant threats of death, Jeremiah never gave up his mission. Each act of persecution only reinforced his determination. He knew his words were not in vain, that he was planting seeds that would one day grow. Jeremiah shows us that the path of truth and faith is not easy. It is a path filled with challenges, pain, and rejection. But it is also a path of courage, resilience, and hope. He reminds us that even when we are persecuted and rejected, God's truth prevails, and the light of faith never goes out. The destruction of Jerusalem. Imagine yourself in Jerusalem, a city that was once the beating heart of a nation. The narrow, winding streets, the bustling markets, the majestic temples erected for the worship of God. But behind this facade of grandeur loomed an imminent shadow of destruction. Jerusalem, once glorious, was steeped in spiritual decay and moral corruption. Prophets like Jeremiah cried out for repentance and obedience, but their words were often ignored or ridiculed. The people continued in their ways of injustice and idolatry, defying the divine warnings. The signs of impending ruin were clear. The mighty Babylonian Empire, led by the feared king Nebuchadnezzar, was advancing relentlessly towards the holy city. Jeremiah had prophesied, with sadness in his heart, that destruction was inevitable if the people did not sincerely turn back to God. The dark day arrived. Jerusalem, once a beacon of faith and hope, was now surrounded by the relentless forces of the Babylonians. The walls that protected the city were no match for the overwhelming might of the enemy. The sons and daughters of Judah saw their homes set ablaze, their streets engulfed in chaos and pain. The Temple of Solomon, the ultimate symbol of God's presence among his people, did not escape destruction. The walls that had witnessed centuries of prayer and sacrifice were now desecrated by fire and violence. Lamentations echoed through the hills as the once proud and confident people now found themselves displaced and desolate. Jeremiah, the faithful prophet, was not spared from the suffering. He personally witnessed the tragedy he had so often warned about. His heart ached as he saw the city he loved reduced to rubble, his prophecies unfolding before his eyes. But even amidst the desolation, Jeremiah did not abandon his faith. His lamentations resonate through the centuries, an expression of pain and devotion. He wept for the city, for those who perished, and for those who were taken captive to foreign lands. Yet, within his laments, there was also a spark of hope, the promise that one day, God would bring comfort and restoration to his people. The destruction of Jerusalem is more than a dark chapter in ancient history. It is a powerful reminder of human frailty, the need for justice, and the importance of living in obedience to divine principles. Jeremiah, with his courage and faithfulness, continues to inspire us to seek truth and justice, even in the face of the most terrible adversities. May his words echo in our hearts, reminding us that just as Jerusalem fell, any empire or city can fall if it is not founded on justice and the will of God. Let us learn from Jeremiah the importance of listening to God's voice and following his ways so that we can avoid the same mistakes that led to the fall of a city once called holy. Jeremiah and the message of hope. The powerful kingdom of Judah had been destroyed, and many of its inhabitants were taken as prisoners to Babylon, a distant and strange land. Among these exiles, there was a deep sense of desolation. They were far from their homeland, far from the temple, and it seemed as though God had abandoned them. But amid all this suffering, there was a glimmer of hope, and this light came from the words of a prophet named Jeremiah. Jeremiah, who had stayed in Jerusalem, was aware of the suffering of his people. He knew how much they needed comfort and direction. So, he wrote a letter to the exiles in Babylon, a letter filled with words that brought hope and encouragement. The letter began to be read at a gathering of the exiles. The people, tired and discouraged, gathered to hear Jeremiah's words. The reader's voice rang clear and strong. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." The weary faces began to light up. It was as if a fresh breeze had passed through the place. Jeremiah continued, "You shall build houses and live in them. You shall plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." Jeremiah's words were telling the people not to lose hope, even in a strange land. He was telling them to live their lives, to settle down and thrive, even in Babylon. And there was one more promise. "After 70 years I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place." That promise was a beacon of hope on the horizon. 70 years seemed like a long time, but knowing that God had a plan and that this plan included bringing the people back home gave them a reason to keep going. Jeremiah also spoke of a new covenant that God would make with his people. It would not be like the old covenant, which they had broken repeatedly. This new covenant would be written on their hearts. God said, "I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more." These words deeply touched the hearts of the exiles. They felt the renewal of God's promise and knew that, despite their mistakes, God had not abandoned them. The story of Jeremiah and his message to the exiles teaches us a lot about resilience and hope. Even in the darkest moments, there is always a light ahead, a divine plan that guides us. Jeremiah's words are a reminder that even when we are far from home, lost or discouraged, there is always a reason to have hope and to keep going. Jeremiah showed that with faith, we can find the strength to move forward, build new lives, and hope for a better future. He taught us that even in exile, we can thrive and find peace, trusting in God's plans for us. And so we come to the end of our journey to learn about Jeremiah, a special prophet who heard God's voice and shared powerful messages with the people. He faced many challenges but always had courage because he knew God was by his side. Jeremiah teaches us about faith, courage, and the importance of listening to God. If you enjoyed learning about Jeremiah and want to continue discovering more amazing stories from the Bible, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to receive all our updates. Also, remember to leave a like on the video. It really helps us continue bringing content like this to you. Remember, with faith and trust in God, we can face any challenge that life throws at us. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next biblical adventure.